both in the UK and abroad, advising museums and collectors on acquisitions, running artist residencies and prizes, and mentoring photography groups, as well as writing exhibition catalogues and attending portfolio reviews in the UK and indeed beyond these shores as well. So I think it will be for Katy to introduce Sara and to initiate the conversation. So over to you, Katy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Monica, and thank you very much indeed for inviting us to be part of the Insiders Outsiders Festival. We're really grateful to you for hosting us and honoured to be able to make a contribution to your festival, which is such a marvellous, marvellous thing. So yes, and I would like to introduce Sara Davidmann. Sara is a multi-award-winning artist. She's currently a reader in photography at LCC. She's made a number of important bodies of work, and this one and the one before are work about her family. And this particular body of work was the result of a major award, a Philip Leverhulme Foundation Award, which she was given a few years ago, and she'll tell us more about that, which enabled her to make this body of work. And I should add that there's a book published by Gost to accompany this exhibition. This is Sara's third monograph. The one before was about her uncle, Ken. Well, we're not really, unfortunately, going to have time to talk about that work as well, but I urge you to seek it out. So that's just a brief introduction to Sara and her work. And now I'm going to share my screen and we're going to talk about her exhibition, My Name is Sara, that's currently on at Four Corners. So give me 1 second. Okay, so hopefully, can you see, Sara, can you see a picture of the album?
I can't. I wonder if...
No, Katy, nothing's come up yet. There you are,
Perfect.
Yes, that's the transport list, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Okay. So unfortunately, we're going to have to go straight to the transport list, Sara. I hope that's okay, which is actually a fine place for us to start. Hopefully I can come back to show you an image of the photograph album, which was I suppose, how this exhibition really came about, or how this whole body of work started. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, of course.
Start off. Yes,
thank you, Katy, for that lovely introduction as well. And thank you, Monica, also for hosting this event. Okay, so I'll say a little bit about the photo album, even though we can't see it, because it really was the beginning of this project. And it was in 2016. I found out that my cousin Linda had inherited from her mother, my Aunt Susie, a photograph album which had some early photographs in it. And she'd also inherited some handwritten notes in German that had never been translated. And my cousin very kindly lent these to me. And I spent a lot of time photographing the pictures that were in the album, and I actually had the notes translated. So that was the beginning of this project. And to say a little bit about why I was interested in the photo album specifically, is because my Aunt Susie, Linda's mother, and my father Manfred, their brother and sister, they came over, both of them, on the Kindertransport in 1939 to Britain. So they managed to escape from Nazi Berlin just before the outbreak of World War II. And my father at that time was 14, my aunt was 17. My father was never able to talk about his early experiences growing up as a young Jewish boy in Berlin. He was never able to talk about the family members who were murdered in the Holocaust or his evacuation. All of this formed a chapter in his life that was just too painful to revisit. So I grew up knowing very little about my father's experiences. and very little about the German Jewish side of my family history. When I came across the photo album and the notes in German, together they began to tell the story that my father had never been able to relate. And that's the story of this side of my family. So the image you see here is a transport list. And when I was looking through the album, I realized that a lot of the people in early photographs before the outbreak of World War II did not reappear in photographs after the end of World War II. And I began to look for traces of their lives. The Wiener Library here in London managed to uncover over 130 pages of documents in relation to various members of my family. And this is one of the documents. So this is a transport list for my great aunt Marta's deportation to Auschwitz. It's the last document that exists in relation to my great aunt Marta's life. And Marta is, her married name is Zernek, and she's the third up from the bottom, number 318. So this is one of the many documents that we uncovered. And as well as looking into my own family history, I also looked much more broadly at what was happening in Germany in the build-up to the Holocaust, particularly from 1933 when Hitler came to power, and looking at the anti-Semitic laws that were passed from 1933 to 39, over 400. And they limited and restricted and damaged the lives of Jewish people living in Germany at that time. So I was doing more broad research as well as more specific family research.
So at the same time as doing this, which is really academic research, wasn't it? It was pure academic research on your family, using the Wiener Library, going to Bad Arolsen as well. You started to think about how to respond to the album as an artist. And here is the first group of works that we were going to talk about in some detail, and which in some way I think inspired the title of your exhibition.
Yes, absolutely, yes. And it was exactly at the same time, I should say, as I was carrying out the research that, as you say, was academic, that I started to make the artworks that are in the exhibition and that you will see in our talk today. And this, yes, this is called My Name is Sarah. And this came about in connection with not just my family history, but the laws as well, and also my connection to this history. And I think that's something that we probably will talk about a bit more in terms of the actual materiality of things that have gone into the work. So what you're looking at is a series of photograms of a plait of hair that was cut off when I was 5 years old, that my mother kept in an envelope throughout her life. And in the first image, you see the envelope with the hair inside of it. And I made the photograms taking out the plait of hair and then gradually unraveling it. It had been kept tight, curled up in the envelope for years and years. Now, this came about because of various aspects of the academic research, as Katy called it. In 1938, a law was passed in Germany, the law of the alteration, a law for the alteration of family and personal names. And what that law decreed was that Jewish women, if their first name was not immediately identifiable as Jewish, they had to have the name Sarah added. If they were male, they had to have the name Israel added as a second name if their first name wasn't immediately recognizable as Jewish. And I don't know if anybody noticed in that transport list we were looking at, but next to the name Martha is the name Sarah. And my Aunt Martha, my great Aunt Martha, wasn't given that name at birth. This was a name that she was forced to have added to her name. I also found and photographed the transport list for my great grandmother Dorothea for her deportation to Theresienstadt. The name Sarah has also been written in that document against all the first names for the women, and Israel against all the first names for men. And of course, it's the name that was given to me by my parents. In Auschwitz, my great Aunt Martha, when she arrived, if she was selected for labor, for work, she would have had her head shaved. If she wasn't selected for labor, she would have had her head shaved when she was taken out of the gas chamber as a corpse. Hair has been a very important part of this story. And so part of this work that you see here is me trying to make a connection between now, here and now, and this history.
And I wonder if it's too fanciful to say that the kind of uncurling and almost unraveling of that plait is almost rather akin to the process that you went through as you kind of put this exhibition together. It reminds me of an embryo almost. It appears to be something that's growing and generating in a beautiful way, actually. And hair is something that we see throughout your exhibition, and materiality is clearly incredibly important to you. I only found out yesterday, you told me that you had used hair, you had entwined hair in the hanging piece that we'll see later. And I think it's intriguing that you would put something in that no one even knows about, that, it's a sort of silent message, perhaps.
Yes. And that's great what you just said, Katie, because we've not talked about this unraveling, because actually, I didn't think of it as I was making the piece, but afterwards, I do feel that this work, the way that the plait unravels, is very connected to my journey over the past 5 years, whilst I've been making these artworks, whilst I've been finding out about my family history.
We'll just look at them in a little more detail, which also brings me to talk to you about process. And you describe yourself as a lens-based artist, but I mean, there are so many different processes used within this exhibition, not all of which we can actually talk about today, but maybe you could say something also about the way that you've used blood, actually blood like hair, as this sort of, it's incredibly visceral material to work with, I would say.
Yes, so this piece, for anyone who hasn't been to the exhibition, what you're actually looking at here on your screen is 12 light boxes that are running from the floor to the ceiling in the exhibition, in the gallery. And the light boxes were originally made using a microscope, a microbiology microscope, with small samples, blood samples from both myself and living members of my family. For me, using blood, using hair, has been a very important part of the work. And I think what you mentioned, Katie, about the hair in the prayer piece not being actually noticeable, in a sense, these things don't need to be noticeable, they just need to be there. With this piece, though, I think the knowledge that what you're looking at is blood is actually a real integral part of the piece. And when I began this piece, I'd been reading up on the laws, as I think I mentioned just before. I mean, they do feature, they really affected me quite deeply. And there were laws that were passed in 1935. They became known collectively, there's two of them. They became known as the Nuremberg Laws. And those laws were, one was the Reich citizenship law, the other was the law for the protection of German blood and German honor. And the Nazis believed that, or they put it out that they believed that Jewish blood would contaminate pure Aryan blood. And in these laws, Jews were not allowed to marry people who were non-Jews. They were not allowed to have sexual relations with them. And Jews were seen as a race determined by genealogy. And the Nazis talk of blood a considerable amount. That's how they sort of symbolized, if you like, the differences between the races. It was held in the blood. And a Jew was legally classed as a Jew if they had 3 or more Jewish grandparents. If someone had 2 Jewish grandparents, they became categorized as a Mischling. And there were 2 categories of Mischling. Mischling, basically, to put it gently, means mixed race, but it was a very pejorative term. If I was to be categorized by the Nazis at that time, I would have been a Mischling. And for me, what's important about this piece, I've called it Mischling. And one of the things that's really important about this piece is that through using the blood of living family members, it shows the survival of my family, despite all these laws that were passed, despite everything that was done to try to prevent the survival of the family, or the survival of all Jewish families in Germany and occupied territories.
And you mixed blood from all the members of your family, Jewish, non-Jewish, from all your parents, grandparents?
Not from my parents or grandparents, because they, at the time of working on this project, they were all dead. I only took blood from living family members.
Yeah.
Yes, from their descendants, absolutely. All of us, all of the descendants are mixed race. We're all Mischling.
You're all Mischling. And can you also tell us a little bit about the other way that you use blood within the exhibition, in mixing it in with bleach and other materials? Again, a sort of hidden use of blood, I think.
Yes, it is. You're right. It is almost a hidden use of blood. I hadn't thought of it like that. There were 2 series. One is called Looking for Leo. The other is Kinderfest. And I wanted to work with photographs from the album, but to create interventions with them. And so for those 2 series, I made digital and actually work with the image that had been in the album, but actually rework it. And I mixed my own blood, some of my own blood, in with the photographic developer, so that each of these prints that I made were printed with blood.
Thank you. And then we're not going to show those because I'm aware we can't show everything in the exhibition. And in a way, I think it's the next body of work, which is perhaps, I think, where you've really used the album to the greatest effect, perhaps, or in the most powerful way. And I'd love you to explain how you decided to make their perfect copies, aren't they, of the photographs, which you burned, and it was that process of burning that was so important to you, and how to sort of memorialize that process in 4 videos, which I think everyone who has seen your exhibition has found extremely moving, and very meditative as well. A chance to be still and consider the fate of your family members.
Yes. In the installation, there's 10 videos, and at any one time, there are 4 videos showing, 1 on each wall. And this work began, I'm afraid we're not showing the video here, we're just showing video stills from the videos. But I began with the idea of working with reproductions of photographs from the album, printing them to the same size as the photographs that are in the album. So they're direct copies, really. And I wanted to burn them, but burn them so that I would actually have something that was left. The remains would be the work. And I'd been reading about everything that had been going on through the Holocaust and before, and there was so much burning. And in a way, it just seems so kind of obvious maybe to say it, but there was just so much burning, the burning of books, the burning of synagogues, the burning of people. And so I was going to make these small remains. And what happened was, when I started to burn the photographs, I realized that what I was seeing was something which was much more than what I'd at first imagined. There was something so emotionally compelling and powerful about seeing the photographs actually burning, slowly burning until there's nothing left. And that made me realize that that was what I had to record. That was what I actually had to show. And so that was the beginning of this piece of the videos. And collectively, the video installation, the 10 videos, are called For Leopold. And Leopold was my grandfather, and he disappeared in the Holocaust.
When I first started working with you, you had kept in hundreds of Tupperware boxes the ashes of the burnt photographs, as if you felt that those were the work as well, or those were important things that you couldn't throw away. And I wonder how you sort of decided to move from those things to actually having the burning itself, that process of burning being the work.
I suppose in the end, both. What happened was they separated out so that the videos became one work. The act of burning, the process of burning became one work. That became For Leopold. All those plastic boxes you saw in my studio are still there with all the ashes and all the remains in them. And yes, I do feel I have to hold on to them, which is something I don't know if I can really articulate why, but I do. I feel I have to keep them, and keep them as carefully as I can, even though they disintegrate every time you move the boxes. But there's a second piece where I did end up using some of the burnt photo remains. I think if we move forward,
to come on to it. Before we do,
yes.
I also think we have to talk about your decision to burn these photographs, because I think it's something that I'm not sure one could describe it as controversial, but it's it's quite a sort of deliberate act to burn images of people who have been murdered. So effectively, in some ways, to murder them again, or to show us this process again. And I wonder if that was something that caused you concern, or how you feel about doing that to members of your own family.
Yes, this is a really good question. And early on, when I was making the burnings, I was really concerned about this, and really concerned about how this might be perceived by other people. But at the same time, what I was seeing in watching these burnings was something so powerful, that moved me so powerfully, that I felt I had to show this. I needed to show this to other people. I needed other people to experience, to see if they would experience what I experienced. Because of course, I didn't know if other people would experience, I still don't know if other people experience the same thing, of course. But from people's responses, what I felt as being so powerful watching these photographs burn, it does seem that other people also feel that. And how to explain this? So many terrible things were done. So many things beyond belief, really, were done during that period of time. My burning the photographs to try to get close to a feeling in connection with that is so little in comparison to what was actually done.
Yes, I mean, I think that this work in some ways is a search for connection, isn't it? Connection to something that must have come as a shock to you, or something that had been hidden from you and was revealed to you to a degree quite late on in your life, and which must have been overwhelming to try to come to terms with, particularly when there was no one who really you could discuss it with. That the opportunity to talk about it had passed, I think, to a degree.
Yes, I mean, it hasn't been an easy project to work on at all, and at times it's been incredibly difficult. I mean, there are times, for example, when I went to Bader Olsen to photograph the documents, and to be holding one of those transport lists that was connected to the murder of a relative of mine, to be holding it in my hands, and to know that the people who'd held that document previously had been connected to the death of a family member. I mean, situations like that were almost overwhelming. But in a way, I don't think I could have done this project when I was younger. I actually don't think I could have done it. It's felt like the right time for me to do this. And if I didn't do it now, it might be too late to do it. So, although I didn't know about what happened to my family previously, I didn't know about my father's experiences, I do think this was the right time for me to do this project.
And this brings me to prayer, which is the other way in which you were able to use the burnt fragments. I don't know if they're the same fragments that we see burning in the video, if they're separate fragments that you made specifically for this piece. And I think it's important to explain to viewers about the use of the stones in this piece actually as well, because not everyone is going to necessarily understand the particular relevance and importance. This is, to me, this is a sort of memorial to your family members, in a way, a sort of three-dimensional physical memorial to everything you've made.
Yes, so this piece is called Prayer for the Dead and the Living. And you mentioned, are they the same pieces that were in the videos or not? No, these are separate. These are separate. In the videos, the photographs burned through very slowly until at the end, what you're watching is ash with the last embers and last kind of puffs of smoke. And so in the videos, there is nothing left. With this piece, I hung the small burnt photo fragments. They're hung from the ceiling, and each photo fragment has a stone attached to it. And I've used wire and thread to hang the piece. And it's a Jewish tradition that when you go to the grave of someone who's died, to leave a stone. And it's an act of remembrance and an act of respect. And it's also a way of saying, we've been here, or I've been here, and this memory will live on in and through me. So that's connected to leaving stones on gravesides. And this is a detail of one of the small burnt photo fragments.
And this is where you might have woven some of your hair into these.
Yes, I'm now trying to look to see if I can't see any hair on that one. I'll look at the next and see if I can see the hair. So here you see the stone quite clearly. And in the exhibition, we had a white platform as a base. And when the air conditioning was on, the piece just moved slightly and the stones would turn, and the proximity of the stones to the base, none of them touched the base. They were slightly off the base, but there was something about the movement as well that I like.
Well, it felt almost as if it was outside, just in nature, I think, and also the shadows played on the base very beautifully, I think, creating a sort of abstract pattern. It's a very meditative piece of work, I think, and I think we both felt that if we had an opportunity, or if you had an opportunity, you could make a very large work, in fact, in this way.
Absolutely.
Fill a huge gallery.
Yes, it would be wonderful to. I mean, it was restricted. That was the only thing in Four Corners. There wasn't enough space really to have the sort of amount of the work, the sort of body of work that you would have wanted, because you had to allow space for everybody to walk around and actually experience the other works. So it did limit the size of this piece, and it would be wonderful to have it filling, a large space and for people to just walk around the outside. Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Yes, so I think in conclusion, I mean, there is this term which we keep using, I think, without fully understanding, which is post-memory. And I think both you and I understand that this is work that falls within the category, or our understanding of what post-memory is, work that is your response to something that happened to your family but not to you, and your understanding and how that personally affected you and other family members, I suspect, as well, through your father and his sister. And I think it's something, can you explain more about that in a way, the sort of reverberations of this through your life and how it's expressed in the work?
Yes, I think without question, post-memory, also there's a term that's now used, intergenerational or transgenerational trauma. I think people are starting to understand more about this now. I think for me, the simplest way to try to explain it is that I feel a very deep connection to this history. And in making this work, in spending 5 years actually very closely thinking about and feeling about what happened to my family, it's given me a more solid place in the world, in a sense, because of that connection.
And it is worth mentioning that this is the second body of work that you've made about your family through the discovery of archival material within your family, and that the techniques that you used in both bodies of work, there was some similarity, but they were very different, I think, actually. Your response to discovering these family, I don't know if you want to call them secrets, but family stories that you may not have known about, and how your response to these bodies of work varied, actually.
Yes, I mean, after Kent Be Destroyed, the previous project, I didn't intentionally set out to work with another archive, another family archive. That wasn't my intention. But I wanted to find out what had happened to my family. And the photo album, I suppose because I am a photographer and an artist, the photo album for me made a lot of sense. That was a way for me as an entry into this whole project, really, I think. Even though it was the first thing I came across, it does make a kind of a sense. Excuse me. But I wasn't deliberately searching out for another archival project. But having said that, I own a lot of my mother's diaries and notebooks, and the work with my family history began in 2011 when I discovered all of those, when I had to help clear out my mother's house. And again, it was something, like you said, a secret. We had no idea that she had written such details about her life all throughout her life. And there are masses of those I still haven't gone through. There's also another whole history on my mother's side of the family, which would be incredibly interesting to engage with. But for now, I think I probably won't be moving forward to look at any further archives immediately. And you mentioned something about process to do with some of the processes in Kent Be Destroyed. I began with that project to use processes of destruction and erasure. And I think with the series we didn't talk about, Kinderfest and Looking for Leo, they have a stronger connection to that previous project. But then I think with this project, the processes of destruction have become much more intense, which is connected to the nature of the project.
Yes, I can see that there's a tension between telling a family story and making it universal. And also I wonder how far you want this body of work to be educational, and for people who see it to come away with a greater understanding of what happened during the Holocaust beyond your own family story. And I think that there must be a tension around that, you know. And I can see in the book you've reproduced all of the anti-Jewish laws, which I think is absolutely fascinating. And I'm interested to know why you decided to do that.
I must say, they aren't all reproduced there, but a lot of them are. I was trying to find out more about the laws that were passed in Germany from 1933 to 39 particularly, although they were continuing to be passed after that time. And I could only find a certain number of laws that were repeated over and over that had been translated. And through Yad Vashem in Israel, I was told about 2 books, and both of them were in German. And I was able to buy one of them, which was amazing. And I had somebody translate a lot of the laws for me, but it's quite a substantial book. And so I had to be quite prudent about how many I was actually translating. But for me, reading through the laws, I think it's absolutely horrific as you read, as things were taken away and taken away and taken away from Jewish people. And the kind of the mass of laws just emphasizes that, you know, the intensity of this. It's not just a few laws. It was law after law after law.
I think that definitely comes across in the publication. I mean, it's an overwhelming, you know, number of pages are actually given over to that. And it's also very interesting that you had to get that translated.
Yes.
And I would have imagined that those would have already been published in English. So I think that's very interesting. I'm aware of the time. We've talked for 45 minutes. I just wanted to point out that I did put an image of the album up finally at last, so the audience can appreciate how beautiful it is actually. It's a very significant and large album. And I think now probably I should hand back over to Monica if there are any questions. Can I stop?
Thank you so very much, both of you. Most thought-provoking, moving, all the things that one expected, really. Some lovely comments coming through. I wonder if I could just start the ball rolling, though, in terms of dialogue and sort of Q&A. I was quite intrigued, Katy. It's not a criticism, but, you know, you used the word academic for the research that Sarah obviously felt compelled to do. To me, that is absolutely the wrong term. As I say, it's not a criticism. It's just it seems to me that, on the contrary, to be confronted by, and I suspect, Sarah, you'll agree with me, but to be, you know, confronted by the stark physical evidence of atrocity and worse. Yeah,
I think I meant documentary.
Yeah, documentary. Exactly.
Maybe that's the word I meant. Documentary, library-based research rather than visually led.
Fair enough. I suppose I just wanted to make the point that yes, let's use the word documentary perhaps, but
or
I think
archival.
Or archival, yeah. But it is actually precisely the kind of the horror with which one needs to grapple when you look at such evidence, yeah, that actually an artist can metamorphose, if you like, into something bearable and indeed beautiful, as Sarah does. Do you see what I'm getting at? That actually it is precisely the matter of factness of that material that prompts the need, am I right, Sarah, to do something else with it as an artist? Does that make sense to you?
Yes, I mean, I always feel the need to, as you say, Monica, do something with it. That's, yes, absolutely, to respond and sometimes almost to have a conversation with the original documentary material. In a sense, Mischling is that. Also, my name is Sarah, you could say, is, you know, having a conversation with that past, with the documentary and the history aspect of the past.
But it is much more than that, isn't it? Because your work is intensely beautiful. I think, Katy, you sort of referred, you know, used the term once or twice, and it seems to me that it is actually, you know, the power of your work resides very much in the way that you, on the one hand, it's quite elusive and indirect and oblique in its references, conceptually rich, and yet incredibly physical at the same time, and about process and materiality. And it's that kind of bringing together that seems to me very unusual and rich, you know, in the way it works upon the viewer. And I think perhaps as a more general point, sort of carrying on from that, this sort of, you know, it's something that I've been very much aware of as an art historian, looking at responses to the Holocaust, you know, after the event, is, you know, how do you convey, not depict, of course, but convey the horror of it all, and where does beauty fit into that agenda, that equation? And it's not a question that I expect anybody to answer, but I think, you know, it is precisely that unbearable and, you know, kind of ongoing tension between beauty and horror in work such as yours, it is actually so very powerful. So I wonder if you'd like to say something about the role of beauty, perhaps, in what you do?
Oh, that's terrific. Thank you, Monica. Yes, I mean, I think for me, the works, when I respond to work myself, it's because it's often on a pinpoint of something that is beautiful, maybe horrendous, maybe, you know, it's that kind of on a knife point almost. And I think that's that tension. Thank you so much for saying that that's there in my work. That means a lot to me.
I shouldn't hog the conversation, so let me have a quick look and see. Fine, two good questions here, and please keep them rolling in, everybody. Right, from, sorry, I can't see the name properly. Is it Prata? Forgive me, it's a name I can't actually see immediately on the screen here. Sarah, thank you so much for this very, very moving offering, especially for daring to navigate the overwhelming aspect of things and to share these essential stories to help us understand this terrible inheritance and find ways forward. Can you talk a little about the connections between this aspect of Jewish experience and its connections to other cultures' stories, both within the Holocaust and other genocide narratives?
That's a really good question. And I mean, it's impossible to ignore what's happening in the world in terms of genocide and the fact that after the Holocaust, when people built Holocaust museums and memorials, it was always said, so that this shall never happen again. And it hasn't worked. I mean, genocides, and I mean, just continues and continues. And I mean, the most recently, in terms of people fleeing from other countries to try to save their lives, you know, of course, we have Afghanistan and, you know, all these people who are just trying to stay alive, really. And so I think the project does have connections. I mean, for me, it's very much about this specific history and about the personal connection, but I think it definitely has connections to the broader acts of genocide.
Sorry, when you started making it, there was a wave of anti-Semitism in London. I remember there was graffiti on Jewish graves, and I remember that you were very affected by that, and that was very much in your thoughts when you began the project.
Yes, you're right, Katie, of course. That's true. And throughout the whole time when I've worked on the project, I've been increasingly aware of incidents of anti-Semitism. And there's something, I wonder if I can remember it properly. There's a quote that Martin Luther King said. This is probably going to be a paraphrasing, not an actual quote, because I won't remember it word for word, but he said that our lives begin to end when we stop talking about the things that matter, something like that. And that for me is also key to this project. We need to talk about these things. We need to share these things. We can't not talk about these things.
I'm always put in mind, and I'm constantly telling my students what I'm about to say to you, but the text that sums up exactly what you're getting at there is one by Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor, Nobel Prize-winning author, and he put it very simply, and it seems to me absolutely brilliantly done. He simply said, how is one to speak of it? ? How is one not to speak of it? And it seems that just doesn't it? I mean, I'm sure you would agree there. Let's have a look at some. Yeah. Okay. From somebody called Wendy. Thanks for a fantastic insight into this wonderful project. I loved the way that your previous Can to Be Destroyed project evolved, that the project seemed to be continually changing and developing as time went on. Will this project too evolve and change as it has shown elsewhere?
I absolutely hope so. Thank you, Wendy, for that question. Yes, I think Katy and I were just hinting about the possibilities when it's taken elsewhere for the peace prayer for the dead and the living. Yes, I would hope so. I would hope it will evolve.
There's talk, am I right, about the Wiener Library, which is a totally different kind of venue to Four Corners. It's a Holocaust genocide, sort of establishment in the heart of Bloomsbury, possibly playing host to a version of the exhibition. And of course there its resonances would be, and impact indeed, be quite different. But you're quite right, Katy, I completely agree with you that three-dimensional work could look absolutely stunning in a more kind of monumental and perhaps permanent sort of form as a memorial.
Yes, that's my ambition for it, certainly.
Yeah. Indeed. From Deirdre, again, full of praise, your exhibition is wonderful, congratulations. And then a comment, I can't help thinking that all the light in the images gives a form of life, to the painful memories you represent. Does that sound a valid observation?
Yes, that's absolutely terrific. Thank you for that, Deirdre. And the light, I think particularly in that series, Michelin, the light boxes. Light boxes are wonderful. They give an additional form of sort of energy and life. So yes, thank you. That's a really nice observation.
Okay, as ever, comments come flooding in towards the end. From Malcolm, okay, not a question, just to say thank you, Katy and Sarah, for getting this together. A very considered and resonant project. I hope the exhibition got good attendance from, yes, Glasgow.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Okay, a question from Carla, head of Four Corners. Very many thanks, Sarah and Katy, for an excellent and moving discussion. I'm particularly interested in how, Sarah, you feel that artists and communities more widely can engage with such archival histories as a form of therapeutic reinterpretation.
Well, I think that's really interesting. And absolutely, I think artists and communities could definitely be engaging with these archival histories as a way of telling their own stories, and also, as you've said, as a form of therapeutic reinterpretation. Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point.
I imagine the issue is for communities to have access to imagery. It's not easy, I think, for local communities necessarily to be given access to libraries and archives. And I think probably Four Corners is making that happen.
But actually it's the family photographs that could form the starting point, can't it? I mean, most families have at least a few. I mean, in the case of Jewish families, it's very often, as you yourself, Sarah, have engaged with, it's a few precious, yes, surviving images, and hence the shock value of the burning process that you undertook. But I think most families will have one or two very personal images, which, in answer to that first question, you start from where it comes from, from you, from within you, from your family experience, but then that has resonances for many others with different backgrounds, different experiences. But it's surely with the personal that it must start.
I think that's great. Yeah. Yes, yes, that could be very meaningful.
Well, I often think people, refugees, people who arrive, often photographs might be the only thing they bring with them. I mean, there is little as precious as a family photograph, I think. And obviously now they're carried on your phone, so the technology has changed, but the power of that image, I think, still resonates as much as it ever has.
Yes, and thinking about the importance of photographs, the photographs in my Aunt Susie's album, the ones that are loose, you can see have been torn out of another album at least more than once. And we don't know whether it was my aunt was sent on a kinder transport with them to take with her, or if my grandmother, who survived the war in hiding, brought them with her at the end of the war and had kept them with her all that time. So you're absolutely right. Photographs are so important.
And that's why the work that shows the burning of them packs such a punch, doesn't it? Because there is something almost blasphemous, morally contentious about that act, and yet I can see exactly why you're doing it. And again, there is a beauty in the actual imagery that comes out of that.
Yeah.
Lots of other comments coming in, so perhaps we should use the last few minutes to look at them. From somebody called Marius, I was much impressed by this conversation. Thank you very much, Sarah and Katie. I particularly like the way you, Sarah, use the materiality of hair and blood to draw attention to how the Nazi regime, the racist regime, works. So that's not so much a question as a comment. More words of praise. Let's concentrate perhaps on the questions. Right, sorry, again, I can't see who this is from, but many thanks. How do you feel, Sarah, about the work which clearly engenders deep feelings of loss and horror, amongst many others, of course, being also considered to be beautiful? I guess that's what I was getting at earlier.
Well, I think there's a very interesting tension there.
Yeah.
And I think that tension between something that is beautiful and something that is full of horror or loss, the beautiful side of that draws you in and kind of holds you there in the horror or in the loss. I think if you took that aspect out of the object or the photograph, whatever it is you're looking at, it would be a very different thing. So I think there's something that happens through the two being combined.
Absolutely. A comment from Claire here, perhaps the unspeakable nature, but the need, again, how to speak of it, how not to speak of it, of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, is why we're seeing now many second and third generations forming communications and responses to found objects and stories. And that perhaps picks up on something I was going to say earlier. It's not just you. I mean, in your case, you genuinely didn't know your father's story until the discovery after his death, yes, of these documents. But even in the case, and I know many artists from similar backgrounds, even in the case where you know, the Jewishness was known, the Holocaust background was known, silences prevailed, and the eloquence, the kind of unbearable eloquence of silence is very, very powerful indeed. And very often, it seems to me, it's only after the parent has died that the second generation artist feels liberated, isn't quite the right word, but I think you know what I mean, able, yeah, to engage creatively with that family history.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think if the parents are alive, certainly I would be so aware that I might hurt them by bringing to the surface something that they haven't been able to talk about and couldn't face again. So yes, I think it would make sense that it's after parents have died. But
then, of course, it's too late to ask the question. So again, another paradox that all the questions you might have asked are no longer possible to ask. Indeed. From Sue Weiss, thanks for an excellent discussion. I wonder how other family members have responded to the exhibition and also the book, Sarah.
Well, first I must mention my cousin Linda, who may be on this talk. I'm not sure if she is. It was my cousin who lent me the photo album and the notes in German to be translated. And throughout the 5 years that I've been working on this project, my cousin has been endlessly supportive and absolutely amazing. And her response to the book, to the exhibition was so fantastic to have. Absolutely, you know, I'm very, very grateful for the presence of my cousin through this journey. I think the next generation, my nieces and nephews, are really interested in the things that I've uncovered. And I have to say, I'm actually very pleased that the sort of factual side of all of this is in the book, because that means that they have this now. They have, you know, they have something where this information is contained, and they can take it forward at any time that they want to as well.
Carla's just alerted me to the fact that there are 2 comments that have come up in the Q&A, which I'm now looking at. One really corroborates what we've been talking about with A Vengeance, really, from somebody called Sue. I'm also a second generation survivor. And of course, that very term is really interesting, isn't it? Yes.
Yes.
A second-generation survivor. I was brought up in silence for the first few years by my parents. You mentioned your own family not speaking about the subject, and for me too, my parents died before I could find out intimate details. You mentioned things that you used in the exhibition to portray your vision of what happened, including hair, wire, ashes, stones, blood, of course, as well. But you didn't mention whether there's a background music in the exhibition or silence. There isn't a musical element, as I recall, is there? Was that something you thought about?
No, there's silence. And for the video installation, the burning videos, it was really important to me that there should be absolute silence, no sound at all. You don't even hear the sound of burning. So for me, I think to have had music would have taken the exhibition somewhere else. For me, the idea of silence when looking at artworks is quite important, unless music is a part of it or sound is a part of it.
I'm looking at the time, and I have one last comment, which I think would be a very fitting place to end, from somebody called Katy Barron, saying, I've just sat in the Uyghur tribunal and have heard the most horrible testimonies about something that is happening in one of the most powerful countries in the world, China. And this is important. It's been noted that the Jewish community have been very much behind this tribunal. So this exhibition is more relevant than ever now at this time. Thank you so much. And I think that is a good point at which to end, because in my experience, again, whether it's yourself or other second generation artists or indeed third generation artists, I have come across recently and not so recently, there is this sort of sense, almost of a moral compulsion to engage with the plight of refugees and survivors in the present, to make what they do in their creative practice relevant in a wider sense, just as that first question implied. So yes, and that's terribly important. I'm sure you'll agree.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, Katy, do you want to round things off at all with a few concluding comments? Or
that's very kind of you. I mean, thank you for all of your comments and your questions. And I think that this is work that Sarah, on some level, will keep making for a very long time. I think you've got maybe more to do. I can't see you stopping doing this, actually, even if your practice moves forward. And I think for me, why it is so important is because it's not psychotherapy, this work. It reaches so far beyond anything. I mean, I know it's extremely personal, but to me, it is universal as well. And that's why it's so important. And I hope that lots of you can make it to Four Corners by Saturday is the last day. And hopefully Sarah will be in the gallery on Saturday. And so if you are able to visit, it'll be a chance to talk to her about the work in detail and to meet her, which is an enormous pleasure. So thank you, Sarah. And Monica.
Thank you, Katy, and thank you, Monica. Thank you both so much. And thank you to everybody for all your fantastic questions. It's been a really great event. Thank you.
And thank you. And let me just add my words to Katy that actually there never is a substitute for seeing the real thing in a gallery space. What we've seen today has been a tantalizing glimpse on a flat screen of a very remarkable project. So very many thanks. Just a reminder that the event has been recorded. It will appear in the not too distant future, both on the Insiders Outsiders YouTube channel and also on the Four Corners website. I'd also just like to mention as a parting shot that much to my delight, the editors of an anthology that's coming out in the next few weeks as an anniversary tribute to Jewish Renaissance magazine that some of you may perhaps have come across. It's called The Age of Confidence, the New Jewish Culture Wave, but they chose, unbeknownst to me, although I did write about Sarah's work in my essay precisely about second generation visual artists in the UK, but what image did they choose for the cover? It was one of those wonderful unfurling plats that we saw right at the beginning of the talk, and I'm so delighted, Sarah. So you might like to look out for that as well. Good, I think enough for one night. Go and see the exhibition, everyone. Please do if you haven't already. And many thanks again once more to both Sarah and Katy, and for the rest of you for being here. All the very best and good night.
Thank you so much. Good night.